24 years ago this week, on March 23rd, 1997, WWE presented WrestleMania 13, titled Heat. The very definition of a one-match show, if I've ever seen one. And if you take that one match out, you have one of the worst WrestleManias of all time. It is among the worst even with this match. But what a match it was. It was also the final WrestleMania to feature Vince McMahon as an announcer. Rocky Maivia made his WrestleMania debut defending the Intercontinental title in a match against the Sultan, a man who years later would claim that he ran down a man in cold blood for The Rock. And Ahmed Johnson tagged with the Legion of Doom in a win over the Nation of Domination in what I thought was a pretty fun Chicago street fight where they threw everything at each other, including quite literally the kitchen sink, which Hawk brought down to the ring with him. Years later, Road Warrior Animal would claim that Ahmed Johnson stole the spiked shoulder pads that he wore that night. I guess after the show was over, he never returned them. He took them and did whatever, God knows what with them. He called him basically a thief. And Ahmed, it got back to Ahmed during a shoot interview that he did in 2006. I guess he was not aware of the comments that Animal made or aware that he even had heat with Animal. And you can find the clip, it's on YouTube. So as the interviewer is explaining to Ahmed Johnson what Animal had to say, he said he was unaware that he had any heat with Animal, but that if he did, he said, and I quote, "Fuck him." Ahmed says he was very tight with Hawk, and Hawk gifted the shoulder pads to him, and along with a New Japan jacket. And after Hawk died, he claims that he donated the shoulder pads to the Sportatorium in Dallas for an exhibit that they had. It might have been some kind of Hall of Fame exhibit of some kind where they take pieces of memorabilia from a certain superstar. So he claims he donated it to some kind of exhibit. And it's very strange because the Sportatorium was demolished months before Hawk passed away in 2003. So I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt and assume that maybe he's talking about some other place in Dallas that might have wrestling, memorabilia in it. But I laughed when I first saw that. He was like, well, I didn't even know I had heat with Animal, but if he said that to me, fuck that guy. It's like, he knows where to find me. Ahmed doesn't take no shit. He goes, if he wants to find me, I'm not a hard man to find. We can do this face to face. I guess now they can't. But at the time, they could have. The original main event for this show was to have been a rematch from the previous year's WrestleMania between Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels. Only this time, Shawn would put Bret over just the same way that Bret did for Shawn the year before in the Iron Man match at WrestleMania 12. Bret was going to win the Royal Rumble in 97. I've talked about this in previous segments, and Vince Russo has also told the story. He was a guest. Russo at the time would play a character on Livewire, the Saturday morning call-in show, called Vic Venom. That was also the name that he used in the magazine for his column. And he had been a guest on an episode of Livewire leading up to the Royal Rumble that year. And he was asked, who do you predict is going to win the Royal Rumble match? And he said, well, Bret Hart's going to win. Not because anybody told him. He wasn't even, the head writer at the time. He just legitimately thought, well, it's pretty obvious that Bret Hart is probably going to win the Royal Rumble. So he blurted out Bret's name, and Vince McMahon chewed him out after the show. Oh, you spoiled it. Why would you spoil the outcome of the Royal Rumble? And Russo said to him, dude, I just said the name that I legitimately thought was going to win the match. So that's why Vince McMahon changed it to Stone Cold cheating to win the Royal Rumble in 97. Fast forward a few weeks after the Rumble to the Thursday Raw, Thursday Live special in February. Shawn Michaels is scheduled to defend the championship in a rematch against Psycho Sid. In his book, this is the way that Bret Hart recounts the happenings of the time. It says Vince McMahon tells him the new plan, which is that Bret will screw Shawn Michaels out of the title in his match with Sid, and then in the Final Four match at In Your House, Shawn will screw Bret out of a win. Because before the belt was vacated, that Final Four match was going to be a match to determine who would go on to WrestleMania to challenge for the title. So Shawn would simply return the favor and screw Bret out of a win. And then at WrestleMania, it would be The Undertaker challenging Sid for the title, and Bret Hart would wrestle Shawn Michaels underneath, I guess you could say in the co-main of Mania that year, in a ladder match with Shawn Michaels putting his hair on the line. His long flowing locks. And Bret claims that Vince McMahon told him that you're going to cut off all of Shawn's hair at the end of that match. Now, I have no idea what would have been hanging from the ceiling in a ladder match with no title on the line. I mean, maybe barber shears for Bret to use, possibly from Brother Brutai. This is what he claims that Vince told him. I find it impossible to conceive of the idea that Shawn Michaels would have allowed Bret Hart to cut off all of his hair. But when Bret pressed Vince on why he was changing plans all of a sudden, Vince told him it was too predictable. I'm sensing a pattern here. If it's too predictable, then it needs to be changed. I mean, look, you never want to be too predictable, but this idea that predictable is somehow a bad thing, predictable does not mean bad. If it makes sense and it produces the desired outcome, predictable is perfectly fine. You just don't want to overdo it. But then, of course, came Shawn Michaels' knee injury when he lost his smile. He lost his smile. He lost his smile. Where did his smile go? Lost his smile. And the news that he would need potentially career-ending knee surgery. Bret said that he was in the back, standing next to Undertaker when the news broke. Undertaker turned to him and said, "I'll believe it when I see the scar." He says that Undertaker said the little fucker doesn't want to drop the belt. And so down the hallway went Bret, Undertaker, and Sid. They all went down the hallway to Vince's office. They walk in there. They said Vince was in legitimately near tears about the situation with Shawn. He was legitimately concerned that Shawn had this devastating injury and his career could be over. And he was going to lose one of his big stars. Although apparently Vince had, I guess he had this personal affection for Shawn Michaels. Hell, if you believe Road Warrior Hawk, it was a little more than just a personal affection for Shawn Michaels. But we won't spread those wild rumors and accusations here on this podcast. No. We're not going to do that. But he said Vince was in near tears about the situation with Shawn, and this is when Vince McMahon informed all of them of the new plan, which was to have Bret win the belt at the pay-per-view, and then he would drop it the next night to Sid to set up Bret Hart against Steve Austin at WrestleMania, and The Undertaker challenging Sid for the championship. The submission stipulation for Bret and Austin was added a few weeks later. Austin has said that he was at home. He had a minor knee injury. Actually, I think when he did the run-in the match to cost Bret the belt, you could see him limping back to the dressing room. I think that's where he had tweaked his knee. So he was at home watching a taped episode of Raw on television like the rest of us when all of a sudden they announced that this is going to be a submission match. And he was like, what the fuck? Nobody had told him. He goes, I'm not a submission wrestler. I don't have any submissions. I mean, I guess he had the $1 million dream, but it's like, I don't have any submission holds. What are we going to have a submission match for? But the Bret Hart-Steve Austin match is not just one of the best matches in WrestleMania history. Easily a top 3 match all time at WrestleMania. It is one of the best matches, period, in company history. It was a masterclass in how to pull off a successful double turn. We had the iconic image of Austin, blood pouring down his face, trying to break out of the sharpshooter, but passing out from the blood loss. Ken Shamrock, the guest referee, right, calling for the bell. Bret, not content with the damage that he had inflicted after months of being fucked over by Austin, going back after the knee after the match was already over. Ken Shamrock gives Bret this great waistlock. I mean, he propelled him into the air. This great waistlock takedown. Bret teases fighting him. The crowd wants to see it. Bret does the heel move and backs off to a chorus of boos. This was Bret's magnum opus here at WrestleMania. Fantastic stuff. And his night wasn't over yet. He and Shawn may not have had their main event match, but they were both involved in the main event. Shawn was on commentary. He danced his way down to the ring. He's posing and prancing and dancing around, hardly looking like somebody who had just weeks earlier been told, his career might be over. He was in the ring crying about how he may never wrestle again. He looked pretty good. He also, by the way, on his way to the ring, flashed an NWO for life hand gesture, which got him a lot of heat. And you also had Bret coming out here at the end of the show, trying to interfere before the match. He got powerbombed by Sid. Then the match gets underway. He came back out again later for the finish, caused the distraction. That led to Sid losing and getting the tombstone. Undertaker wins. And no, I don't believe the urban legend, which is all it is. And Sid has denied it, but I mean, look, Sid would deny it anyway because it's embarrassing. I don't believe it, though, that Sid crapped his pants during this match at WrestleMania. And I haven't heard Undertaker get asked about it either. And all those interviews Undertaker did last year promoting his documentary, I don't think anybody asked him about it. So I don't believe it to be true. Only way to know is to ask Undertaker. I'm sure, if Sid did, Undertaker would have smelled it. So as far as I know, that's all it is an urban legend. But we were not even a full 3 months yet into this year, and Undertaker's win was the 5th WWE title change already in 1997. Already. Michaels beat Sid for the belt at the Royal Rumble, then Vacant won the belt, then Bret Hart won it in the Final Four match, then Sid won it back the next night, and then Undertaker beat Sid for the belt here at WrestleMania. Talk about hot potato. But, I wonder, though, if Shawn had wrestled, if Shawn Michaels didn't have his knee injury and he had wrestled Bret on that show, Stone Cold would have been the odd man out that year because you would have had Undertaker and Sid, Bret and Shawn. What would Austin have done? And I would argue that he had no bigger, more important match in his career than the one he had here with Bret Hart. So it's one of those things where things just sort of happen for a reason, and it's amazing to think about how different one's career, a different path their career might have taken with one little change or one little tweak here and there. 22 years ago this week, on March 22nd, 1999, one of the more legendary segments in Raw history took place with Stone Cold Steve Austin driving a Coors Light beer truck down to the ring in the middle of an opening promo with Vince McMahon, The Rock, and his corporation. I had this at number 19 on my own list for the top 30 greatest Raw moments way back when I did that on Sound Off episode 228. For those who care enough to go back and listen to that, I think that was 2012 when I did that list. We were on the road to WrestleMania 15, and Austin told Rock he was going to take his ass to Philadelphia, check right into the SmackDown hotel, roll right into room 316, and burn that son of a bitch to the ground. Only he said it with a lot more fire than I just did. Back when people knew how to cut promos and get people hyped and invested in a big main event match. And Vince McMahon became the first man to swim on dry land as he tried to swim his way out of the beer that Austin was spraying at him. A great segment, not so great in what they did in the main event, having Austin pin the Big Show in their very first encounter on free television 6 days before WrestleMania. Remember what I talked about before about Nitro and hot-shotting? Just weeks after Big Show, no less, had debuted in the company, they just threw out the first match with him and Austin on free TV, and Austin just stuttered him and pinned him. Did that really need to happen? Seems kind of unnecessary to me. I thought it was weird then, and it feels every bit as unnecessary today. But the goal was to pop a big rating, and to that end, they were wildly successful. The show did a 6.4 Nielsen rating up against the final, or not the final, but the annual Spring Break episode of Nitro, which did a 3.5 rating. Over 7 million viewers for Raw that night, and the final quarter hour with Austin against Big Show, which ran, and if you want to know why they did this match, and this ran opposite a main event on Nitro of Scott Steiner against Chris Jericho. To say that it was a slaughter really doesn't do it justice. Raw won with a 7.1 in that final quarter to Nitro's 2.9. And the 5-minute overrun for Raw did 8.6 million viewers watching live. It almost doesn't even seem real. It just does not even seem real. 6 days later, on March 28th, it was WrestleMania 15, the Raging Climax, and a very appropriate name for an Attitude Era show. Don't tell Peacock. Months after winning the ill-fated Brawl for All, Bart Gunn got knocked the fuck out in a Brawl for All match with Tough Man champion Butterbean. Gunn was told takedowns would not be allowed in the fight, and he would have to box him straight up, which led to him being knocked out in just 35 seconds. They set the poor guy up to fail. That's basically what happened here. Gorilla Monsoon was introduced to the audience in his last public appearance as one of the judges at ringside for the fight. This was just months before his death, and he was looking just as frail as I have ever seen him. It just made me very sad to see him that way. Undertaker beat the Big Show, or the Big Boss Man. A lot of big people in WWE at the time. Beat the Big Boss Man in a terribly boring Hell in a Cell match where Boss Man was hung from the cell after the match by a noose with the use of a harness that was hidden under his flak jacket. Michael Cole spoiled the finish of the main event earlier in the night when plugging their post show on the Home Shopping Network with, quote, the new WWF champion. Oops. He said this a good 25 minutes before the main event even hit the ring that night. And that has since been edited off of the network version of WrestleMania. Well, I guess now it would be Peacock here in the US. They love editing things out. Stone Cold Steve Austin beat The Rock to become the first, and to date I believe the only man ever, to win the WWE title in back-to-back WrestleManias. If you don't count what The Undertaker did at WrestleMania 23 and 24, because that was the World Heavyweight title, this was the WWE title, I believe Austin would be the only person to have ever done that. 21 years ago this week, on March 28, 2000, at a SmackDown taping in San Antonio, Texas, Stephanie McMahon became the third McMahon family member in just over a year to win a championship, beating Jacqueline in the main event to become the new women's champion. Her father won the WWF title on SmackDown in September of 99, and her brother won the European title in 99 as well. 19 years ago this week, on March 25th, 2002, WWE held its first draft lottery for what it called a brand extension, dividing talent between Raw and SmackDown for the first time with two storyline co-owners, Vince McMahon and Ric Flair. McMahon representing SmackDown, Ric Flair representing Raw. The plan had been for Stone Cold to head up the Raw roster with The Rock heading over to SmackDown, but Austin walked out on the company the night after WrestleMania. Wouldn't be back for several weeks. And so the way things shook out here, Flair drafted Undertaker, Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, X-Pac, Kane, Rob Van Dam, Booker T, Big Show, Brock Lesnar, Mr. Perfect, and other people as well. I just love that Flair drafted Perfect. That's just great. That is great. Vince McMahon drafted The Rock, Kurt Angle, Chris Benoit, Hulk Hogan, Chris Jericho, Edge, and DDP, among others. In the main event, Triple H beat Chris Jericho and Stephanie McMahon in a handicap match, pinning Stephanie, which, per the stipulation, forced her to leave WWE. Until 4 months later, when she returned as the new general manager of SmackDown. 11 years ago this week, on March 28, 2010, WrestleMania 26, from Glendale, Arizona, only the third to ever be held in an open-air venue. After WrestleMania 9 from Caesars Palace, and 24 in Orlando, 19 in Seattle. You could kind of see outside a little bit, but they were indoors. It was a retractable roof. It was not open that night, so that doesn't count. Bret Hart had his first WrestleMania match since his classic with Steve Austin in Chicago. This was the exact opposite of that classic in Chicago. He had a match here with Vince McMahon, and it was a disaster. Vince McMahon thought he had swerved Bret by bringing out all of the Hart family members to ringside as lumberjacks who would be against Bret. But then Bret comes out. Turns out he swerved Vince and revealed that all of the family members were on his side. Which really wasn't much of a swerve, but that's what they were going for. What followed was a far too long plotting match where Bret couldn't take any bumps. I mean, Bret obviously has the history of concussions and the stroke and everything else. I don't know if he had his bout with prostate cancer or that. I think that might have come later on. But the bigger thing is that Bret had a policy with Lloyd's of London that did not allow him to take bumps or any kind of blows to the head. So he was very limited in a number of ways in what he could do. So that certainly didn't help. But on top of that, Bret just destroyed Vince McMahon with an uncomfortable number of chair shots. That it just got to the point where you felt sorry for him. It damn near turned Vince McMahon babyface. But the backstage meeting with Vince and the entire Hart family to map out the match sounds far more entertaining than the match itself was. This comes based on details shared by Natty Neidhart, and Tyson Kidd on an episode of Talk is Jericho from 6 years ago. They said that it was the first time the entire family had been together in years since Stu Hart's funeral. There was a lot of fracture within the family going back to what happened with Owen back in '99. So the family was already very kind of spread out. So this is the first time in a while all of them are together. First issue popped up a few days before WrestleMania when Natty's aunt went off on Johnny Ace. Apparently this woman caused the scene because she was hungry. And she felt that she shouldn't have to pay for her own food. And so she let Johnny Ace and everybody else within earshot know that she was very upset about this. Bret was just generally very angry with all the family members and just the way that they were behaving like children. He reminded them that Tyson and Natty and Harry Smith, who was still working there at the time, they all have to work in WWE full-time. This is their full-time job. Unlike everybody else who's only coming in for a one-off. And Bret's brother Ross pipes up and he asked the question, well, why should our behavior affect Tyson and Natty and Harry? To which Bret asks him, he goes, do you have rocks in your head, Ross? Then during the planning session, I can just imagine the room that they were in, planning all of this out. This is the day of WrestleMania. And Vince McMahon is laying out all of the plans for what they're going to do in this match. And all of a sudden, he's interrupted by Bruce Hart, who says, no, this doesn't make any sense. This basically turns you babyface. And you know what? Bruce was right. But then he started pitching all these other ideas and stuff for SummerSlam that would go all the way to SummerSlam. And he pitched having Batista. Batista should be involved. Because Batista was involved in that one segment on TV where Bret was going to beat up Vince. And Batista ran out and made the save. And he kind of beat up Bret a little bit. And so we need to have Batista in this match. And Michael Hayes was there. Michael Hayes calmly reminds Bruce that Big Dave had kind of a big match already coming up later on in the show. That would have been his title defense against John Cena. So, no, there will not be a Batista cameo here in this match. So Bret finally had to interject. He tells Bruce to shut up. And then Natty's mom stands up. That's Jim Neidhart's wife. She stands up in the middle of all this and says, I think Jim should be involved. And Natty said that her father was the most normal one of the bunch. Of everybody in the family, she claimed that her father was the most normal. And so he decided to keep his mouth shut in the meeting. He didn't say a word. If Jim Neidhart is considered the most normal, if the Anvil is the normal one in this family, then holy shit, what does that say about the rest of the bunch? Natty said that, hey, for his part, Vince McMahon was highly amused and entertained by all of this. They do sound like the perfect family, I will say. And I'm not a big fan of this reality TV garbage. But they do sound like the perfect family for a reality television show where it's one of these shows where you just end up hating every single one of these people, but yet you can't look away. And you tune in loyally every single week. And in the main event, The Undertaker beat Shawn Michaels in a streak versus career match. The first non-title match to headline a WrestleMania show since LT and Bam Bam did it back in '95. They learned their lesson from the year before, not putting their match on last. And it is still the greatest WrestleMania match that I've ever seen. That match from the year prior, WrestleMania 25. They had a tall order in front of them here trying to top that classic. I don't think they topped it, but they came damn close. The matches are very comparable. We even got a jumping tombstone finish by The Undertaker to end the career of Shawn Michaels. Jim Ross was supposed to call that match. Kevin Dunn had told him to bring his tuxedo, which he did. Vince McMahon personally wanted him to work the main event. He was so excited. He brought his wife, Jan, with him to the show. To hear him recount this story in his book, Under the Black Hat, is really sad. He was so excited. People were coming up to him that day or whatever, the day before. Hey, JR, are you here to work the show? And he would go, yup, Shawn and Taker. He was so proud to tell people that he was working the show. Months earlier, he had suffered his third Bell's palsy attack. So that's why this was such a big deal to him to come back. His first time back, calling a big match, Shawn's last match. When he got to the hotel, he saw Kevin Dunn at the bar, and Kevin Dunn waved him over. Kind of waved to JR to come on over. So Jim Ross, he puts his stuff away first in his room, and he comes back down, and he goes over to Kevin Dunn, and Kevin Dunn goes, I got some bad news. We're not going to use you. And Jim Ross says, but I brought my tux just like you asked me to. And Dunn goes, we don't think you're healed enough. Which translated basically means we don't like the way your face looks. That's really what he was saying. Whether it was his call, Vince, whoever it was who made the final call, they didn't like the way he looked. He goes, but Kevin, I brought my wife with me. He says, sorry, JR, we're not using you. And that was it. That was the whole conversation. Kevin Dunn went back to whatever it was he was doing, watching, Woody Woodpecker cartoons or whatever it is that he does. And just like that, Jim Ross was bumped off the show in favor of Michael Cole. Shawn Michaels and Undertaker, they lobbied very hard for him to call their match. Shawn even said, we were told under no circumstances are you calling this match. Vince did not want to hear about this anymore. He was sick of hearing us talk about it. And what's cool is that when the show, he was up in the skybox for the show, wasn't used. What's cool is that when the show is over, right? So these two guys just had this epic main event. Shawn Michaels is probably a ball of emotions right now. He just wrestled what he believes to be the last match of his career, which turned out to not be the last match of his career, which just in the last week or so, he did some interview with the New York Post and actually admitted that he regrets doing that crown jewel match in Saudi Arabia a few years ago. I think we all regret that he did that match. But here you have these two guys, and what they did was they sent word for JR to meet them out by the buses after the pay-per-view. Across from the hotel was this giant parking lot with several tour buses that the top talents would, ride around in. Undertaker had positioned the buses in such a way to block out anybody from seeing them, like kind of giving them their personal space. And he and Shawn Michaels were already sitting there with boxes of beer. There were 3 bottles of Jack Daniels. Undertaker is sitting there smoking a cigar. And they wanted JR to come and join them. And they all just sat around and they bullshitted all night. And I just thought, again, you hear him write about this in the book and you can tell how much that meant to him after what probably was just this completely embarrassing, demoralizing, news that he had just been given. Especially after going around and telling everybody, yep, I'm working the show, and then he doesn't. It's got to be embarrassing for him. And the fact that Shawn and Undertaker, did that for him after this big match, and they're just sitting out there by themselves, and they, made it a point to summon for him, to call him over just to kind of hang with him and give him that moment, is a very cool thing. You can really tell how much of a rock his wife Jan was to him when you read these stories and you hear him talk about her, which makes it all the more heartbreaking that 4 years ago this week, on March 22nd, 2017, Jim Ross's wife Jan died after suffering a catastrophic brain injury. She was struck from behind by a 2000 Mercury Grand Marquis, driven by a 17-year-old while she was riding her Vespa scooter near their home to the gym. The following year, a judge dismissed the vehicular homicide charge against the driver, despite objections from the state. JR tweeted this week, "My late wife Jan died 4 years ago today. Still can't believe that she's gone, but we had 25 plus amazing years together for which I am eternally thankful. She would have loved my gig at AEW and living on the beach. Jan made me a better man." And that is this week in wrestling history.